Hey, Marshall here. Just a quick note before we dive in. These are, well, a new type of video I'm trying out. It's part of the Patreon. We've got more videos coming to you from limited resources. I'm aiming to do one of these per set where we have the ability to go deep. Now, this one is going to be a sealed league. Normally, there'll be booster draft, but yeah, I'm going to kind of show you the build and then go through the games pretty quickly. But when there's interesting spots or spots where I think we can learn something, I'm going to really drill down and go deep and try to dissect those points so that we can to learn from it. Okay, so let's get right into it, and hopefully you enjoy it. Hey guys, Marshall here from Limited Resources, and jumped into a sealed league here, and we've got our opening deck all opened up. Let's see what we've got as far as rares go. Ooh, not bad. We got a foil rare with Exert Influence, which gives us a total of 6, including this mythic here. Myria Shepherd, Exert, Fall of the Titans, Oath is whatever, Shrine of the Forsaken Gods is whatever, but Thought Knot's good, Fall's good, Exert is good, and Myria Shepherd's good, and Inverter can be good too. So let's just do the rundown here and see what it is that we have as far as playables go and how our colors break down. Raptor, Smite, Retreat. Oath is playable, but not exciting, like I said. Which kind of describes a lot of our white cards outside of a Myria Shepherd. Oops. I like to sort by color here. And that way I can get these things lined up and see how many playables we have in each color. Maybe. All right, double blinding drone's decent. All right. Our first two colors are pretty good right off the bat. All right, black, not good. I don't think we're even going to be splashing anything for black. This is just not good enough here. Fall of the Titans, Rolling Thunder, Boulder Salvo, Vestige, Freerunner, Bushwhacker. Oh, this is, wow, Devour in Flames. And then a bunch of mediocre stuff. Okay, fair enough. Birthing Hulk, Warden, Stalwart, Summoner, Spider, Pup. Now let's put all the gold cards down here, see what we got. There's a Warping Whale, which I think probably better out of the board. What do we get for colorless? We've got two Pathfinders, a Channeler, a Lantern, Devastator, and then for colorless lands we have Unknown Shores, Shrine, Holdout Settlement, One Waste, a Blighted Woodland, that's interesting, and also a Crumbling Vestige, and then we've also got a little more fixing with the Firelit Thicket here. Okay, so let's take a look now at what we have down here. Our red removal is quite strong. We have Outnumber, which is decent. And we've also got Boulder, Salvo, Rolling Thunder, Fall of the Titans, and Devour in Flames. So I think that red is going to be part of the mix either way. We might be red-blue. Our white really isn't that great outside of the Myria Shepherd, which is amazing. Don't get me wrong. But our white is fairly mediocre beyond that. So maybe we'll kill that. Kill green for now. That means we don't want this. And I don't think we want to splash for these two, but there's a chance. So we'll put that up there. And see what this gives us as far as a deck. So this is 13 creatures, a whole bunch of spells, a lot of removal, some card draw. This looks pretty decent to me. We may want to throw in a Kozilek's Pathfinder here just because we want another power finisher. We've got some cards that I don't love here. What I want to actually look at here is if we cut the... So our red creatures are very mediocre. But our red removal spells are very strong. And so what I want to try to do here is see if we can go red, green, blue. How did you get out of there? There we go. So let's see how this looks. Birthing Hulk, Pathwarden, Watcher, Stalwart, yes. These two... Spider, Larva, this guy. And then for splashes, unfortunately neither of those two work, but we would get Blighted Woodland plus Fertile Thicket. and also the loam larva. Cultivator drone. Let's see, we wouldn't need the Pathfinder anymore because we get the Birthing Hulk instead, which is just better. All right, well, maybe blue ends up being our splash color here, because now that this is kind of coming down to it, I could see cutting all of these. This, probably these two is, oop, actually I think I want sweep away. Where did sweep away go? Oh, there it is. Boop. Down like that. And then maybe I cut sweep away or something. Maybe I cut Wavewing Elemental and just bring in a big colorless threat. You know, I think, like, for example, Pathfinder and Wavewing are relatively interchangeable. I also could just go for the big boy here and just play an Eldrazi Devastator. I don't see any issue with that. This looks like it might be pretty good. We get Devour, Outnumber. So basically, we're splashing red and splashing blue, kind of. I could see killing a sweep away here. Just I like Dampening Pulse, I like Membrane, and I like Exert Influence, and I love Blinding Drone. So I think this actually sets us up fairly reasonably. Another card I could see cutting is Outnumber. Just because we're not super creature heavy, you know, we're kind of in the middle. Like, we're not going to just spew them out. We do have an Eyeless Watcher and a Scion Summoner, which does make it better. Probably makes it worth keeping. Any other good red cards that we're giving up here? Free Runners, just okay. Vestige, I kind of like, though. It's actually kind of sweet because we get tons of good mana here. We get all of the, we get 4, and if we want, we could even play a 5th colorless mana source here. We get 2, or I should say 3 fixing lands plus the Blighted Woodland. Yeah, this deck actually looks kind of great. I'm into this. I think we can make our mana work. I think we can just make it work. All right, let's see what this looks like if we add some basics to it. So we don't need 4 blue sources. We probably want 3. Could be 2. But I think we want 3. And then I think we probably want to run Fertile Thicket for sure, but we might want to run these duels just for Exert Influence, just because, like, they're pretty low risk duels. Even though they're not the ones that actually help us cast things, they just give us free black mana that we don't really have anything we want to spend it on. But I think I'd probably just switch out for another forest here. I really want to be able to cast these middle creatures. The blue stuff can come later. None of it's super timely. You don't have to play Blinding Drone on turn 2 to have it be good. All right, so we'll save this deck. And then, yeah, we could build another one, but I think we'll just stick with this one for now. And we'll just play our matches with this one. All right, so there's our deck. It's a little ambitious, I will give you that, but I think the power level's there, and I think we can make the mana work as well. So let's find out how it does. Match 1, game 1. We hope to get off to a good start, but we kind of don't. We keep a 2-lander here, and we end up missing our 3rd land after our opponent plays a Core Sky Climber and hits us. They follow up with Allied Reinforcements. We do hit a land. Unfortunately, our first threat dies to Hedron Archive into Spatial Contortion. We're forced to use a removal spell to take out the Sky Climber, but a shoulder-to-shoulder on the 2/2/2s drops us down to 4 and leaves us dead on board. Game 2 plays out in kind of a strange way. We have a very slow start to our hand. You can see our opening hand doesn't have any creatures in it, and it's really slow. But it does have a dampening pulse to kind of keep things at bay, and there's even a Thought-Knot Seer here that we can cast with our Blighted Woodland to take away our opponent's best threat. It ends up being a Plated Crusher, the card that we don't have any answer to at the moment. And we start to formulate a game plan. As this game looks like it's going to go long, you can see our opponent has a Jiraga Auxiliary doing work for them, but we've got both of our X spells in hand and start looking at it like, well, with all this extra mana available, maybe we can get just 2 X spells to the head and kill our opponent that way, because we are not in a position to be able to attack here. As if we were to attack, maybe we get in for a hit, but then our opponent taps down our only blocker on end step and crushes us with the crackback. So we have to just sit here and wait and start to work towards the only game plan that made any sense, at least at the time, which was to cast X spells to our opponent's head and actually take them from 20 to nothing. The Kozilek's Channeler helps get to that goal here. We do end up finding some number of threats, but again, don't feel like it's a good spot to attack now that our opponent has a bunch of +1/+1 counters on their creatures. Things get a little bit awkward when they draw an Ondu War Cleric, because the War Cleric actually interferes with our game plan. Luckily, we find a Boulder Salvo to take that down. And this is actually where things start to go wrong for us. Our game plan ultimately is pretty fragile, and we need to build up enough mana to be able to Rolling Thunder for a ton and then cast a cheap spell and do Fall of the Titans. We end up having to play Fall of the Titans on a flyer here and also shutting off the Jiraga Auxiliary engine just to make sure that we stay alive. And things don't get a whole lot better from here as our opponent casts a Breaker of Armies. Luckily, we have the mana to kill it with Rolling Thunder, but still, this is not a winning proposition, as that was our primary game plan, and our opponent's Tapper is still in effect. They also play a Baloth Null the next turn, which makes things even worse, and then to compound that, I mistap my mana trying to steal the Null, but the truth is, the writing's on the wall with Breaker of Armies coming down right afterwards and ready to kill us. So that does it for that game. We lose the first match. All right, match 2, game number 1. We keep a decent hand that needs some help with colors. As you can see, we only have 2 colors. And our opponent starts things off pretty decently. We have Dampening Pulse to kick things off, and then boom, we get to steal Kalitas. Turn 4 Kalitas, we steal it on our turn thanks to Exert Influence, but we're still short on red mana. We're able to attack a few times, though, with Kalitas to keep our life total high as we set up Fertile Thicket to go grab a mountain. We play the mountain, and that's going to give us access to 1 red card per turn. We decided to attack here with Kalitas like we've been doing, and unfortunately, he ends up dying to a combat trick, but so it goes. We play our red mana and play our Grove Rumbler, and we find ourselves in an interesting turn here. We really want to be able to play multiple red spells in a turn, and we find a way to do it thanks to Devour in Flames. We cast it, return the mountain, replay it, trigger landfall, and then even get a fully charged up creature down. We end up curving out here into Eldrazi Devastator, and thanks to our Dampening Pulse, the real MVP of this game, it must be said, we're able to run over our opponent with our huge trampling creatures as we just keep attacking relentlessly over and over and eventually earn the win. In match 2, game 2, we keep an opening 7. Looks pretty good with a lot of different colors of mana eventually. And really, I have to say that a decent start from our opponent is nullified once again by Dampening Pulse, which really wrecks our opponent's opener and also lets our big beefy attackers get in there a little bit down the line here. We kick things off with the Kozilek's Channeler to open up our hand, then we follow up with the Birthing Hulk, which is just bigger than everything our opponent's doing. They can't realistically pressure us, so we use Exert Influence to steal their best blocker here after getting in a big attack for 9 damage, forcing, in fact, a chump block here, and then we steal away the Glider past the turn back, and what a huge swing that is as we draw removal spells that allow us to, well, at least force combat tricks to happen and eventually lose a bunch of the creatures and open up a huge attack that our opponent just simply cannot recover from. All right, match 3, game 1. We keep a hand that has a lot of non-basic lands in it, but it has a Fertile Thicket that we actually brick on. We don't hit at all, but we find a Holdout Settlement, which gets us a Blinding Drone, which is going to be really key in this game as we set up a Seer's Lantern to now tap down the Matter Reshaper just to not take any damage. And then we have a pretty great turn here where we get to play Relentless Hunter and then Surge out a Membrane as well to keep that Reshaper at bay. Our opponent decides that that's not acceptable and goes for the kind of rare Isolation Zone on an enchantment and actually just to free up the Reshaper. That's going to get us in for some damage and let us develop our board as our opponent kind of does nothing here. We tap down their only blocker attack for 6 and force them to do something. They do something. They make a wall. We decide just to exert influence, the matter reshaper here. Steal that away. Tap down the wall, attack with our 3/4, drop them to 7, and the writing's on the wall, as they say. All right, match 3, game 2 is a sweet one. We keep a pretty nice hand with a bunch of our colors and a lot of action happening here. We find blue mana so we can play our blinding drone. It doesn't get countered. And it looked like we might get horribly awry'd there for a minute, but it doesn't end up happening. And we start building out our board early. This time, though, our game plan doesn't quite go perfectly as we get Void Shattered to kick things off, and then followed up with a Containment Membrane on our Blinding Drone, which is really annoying. The 2/4 flyer here is going to start getting in as we develop our mana using Blighted Woodland. So this game's kind of shaping up to be a good one here as we find a decent threat finally. Our hand was pretty threat light at this point. We get blown out here, though, by Void Grafter as we go for the Containment Membrane on the flyer. And gets hexproof temporarily. Now all of a sudden my opponent has not 1, not 2, but 3 2/4s on the battlefield. And this is starting to look locked up here. I use an outnumber to try to kill the flyer, but my opponent has Dispel of all things, and then untaps and plays Birthing Hulk. So things are not looking good for the home team here. I decide to use my removal spell to kill the flyer and see how things pan out. I chump block the Birthing Hulk and then a nice draw. We find a Blinding Drone. I can maintain my life total, and another nice draw. So back-to-back, very good draws for us. We find an 8/9 Eldrazi Devastator, and now all of a sudden it's starting to look like we're the ones who are in the lead. So we pass the turn back to our opponent, use our Blinding Drone on their turn, then crunch in there for 8 damage, dropping them down to 9, and even find a 5/4 trample right after that. We attack here, and it looks like our opponent doesn't understand how trample works, and we're just going to win, but aha. Dazzling Reflection on the splash of all things. I have to admit I did not see that one coming, but it doesn't mean that we lose our creature. It just kind of acts as a fog type effect where our opponent's not going to take damage and in fact is going to gain some life instead. So we just trudge on forward using our drone. I decide to attack here with my 3/4, which in retrospect looks like more of a mistake. I didn't want my opponent to be able to lock a bunch of toughness up on our 8/9 Trampler, but as we can see, another Dazzling Reflection is going to keep my opponent alive and in fact up to 17 life. So we're not done yet. We have a lot of work to do, but they are completely out of cards here. In fact, just using Slip Through Space just to draw cards. But boom! Linvala hits the battlefield here. Fortunately for us, no extra action, and we're going to try to keep the pressure on. So on our main phase, we're going to tap down a creature, tap down the flyer there, and get in for a big hit and try to set up the win where our opponent can't actually attack us the next turn, though that doesn't end up being the case as our opponent draws Blighted Cataract, cracks it, and even finds a retreat to Kazandu. We double chump block here to maintain our life total. Find a Thought-Knot Seer to ostensibly take their last card, though they actually end up casting it in response. And it's a lead by example. We tap down, attack for a bunch, and that's lethal. Match 4 starts off pretty nicely for us. We get to keep our opening 7. We don't hit with our Fertile Thicket, but that doesn't really stop us from developing our board thanks to a Loam Larva to find red mana. We get our biggest threat out there right away. And that's where this game starts to get interesting. So we've got a Relentless Hunter. Our opponent plays a Coastal Discovery, passes a turn back. We develop our board with a Scion Summoner, and this is where it gets really cool. So the thing to pay attention to here is how our opponent decided to tap their mana. They decided to tap the Hedron Crawler and their lands to play this Incubator Drone, very conspicuously leaving up 1 black mana. There's one card in this format that should jump to mind when you see 1 black mana, and that, of course, is Unnatural Endurance. Now, it didn't cost our opponent very much to leave that mana up, just tapping the Hedron Crawler, which was unlikely to block in this scenario anyway, but it's something that we'll keep in mind as we plan out our next turn. So our only good attacker is with Relentless Hunter because we have the pump ability that can get it past both creatures. And the question is, do we attack with it? Should we actually send it into the red zone? And I decide that the answer is yes, we should. Because a lot of time our opponent is just representing that they have the combat trick, but they don't actually have it. And we want to make sure that we punish them for the times when they're simply representing it rather than actually have it. So we decide to attack here. And our opponent immediately double blocks, signifying that they do have Unnatural Endurance. The chances that this is a bluff or a mistake are very low. I would say less than 3% of the time an average Magic Online player makes a bluff of this level. So we're going to assume that they do have Unnatural Endurance. And now the interesting part, again, how do we decide what to do? Should we pump? Should we make them use it? I also could just pass priority and say, okay, fine, we trade off my Relentless Hunter for your incubator drone, and I'll just move on with my life. And there's a lot of things that go into this type of decision, and this happens all the time. And basically what we're saying is, if we decide not to pump, we're saying, I'm okay with trading my Hunter plus my mana for the turn. So whatever I want to cast in my hand, we can take a look at the hand sitting there about what we might want to cast to develop our board for either your incubator drone or your unnatural endurance. It's up to you to decide how you want to do that. If we do decide to pump, we're saying, okay, I'm fine trading my Hunter for your natural endurance, and I'm not going to cast anything for the turn. So the question starts to lead us down the path of, well, what would we be casting for the turn? In this case, most likely a Netcaster Spider, though it could also be really any of the spells in our hand if we wanted to. I decide that there's a big tiebreaker at play here, which is one of our best spells is in hand right now. We've drawn it for the turn. It's Exert Influence. And you know what card's really good against Exert Influence? Unnatural Endurance. If our opponent has that mana available, there's not very many targets that we can actually target with our Exert Influence. So I decide to go ahead and pump and force the issue. And as you can see, our opponent does in fact have the Unnatural Endurance, and we make the trade. As the game plays out, we end up getting pretty far ahead. We're with a good mix of removal spells and tricks here, including we end up finding in a turn or two here a Thought Knot Seer, which is going to reveal our opponent's hand, and it's going to have nothing in it. It's actually just a bunch of lands outside of the Tar Snare there, and my opponent is pretty well flooded out, and with all these great spells in hand, we're able to piece together a victory pretty easily. Match 4, Game 2 starts off a little slowly for us as we have to mulligan, put a non-land card to the bottom, but we do have a turn 2 Blinding Drone, which is one of our best cards. It puts us in a really interesting position here, though, when our opponent attacks with their 2/1 First Strike Zada's Commando. What goes through your head here? So let's take a minute here to actually break the situation down. The first thing you want to note here is that you are the one who's behind. You need time to find your mana and develop your board to get to the powerful spells in your hand. The next thing that we want to look at is, well, what does blocking accomplish for us? And it actually accomplishes a few goals. The first is that it actually forces our opponent to do something. That's right. If they do nothing, we block, they threw away a card. That's unacceptable. We know that they have something in their hand that's going to make this work, and that something is going to cost mana. That means that they're going to spend the mana on that instead of developing their board, and that's good for us. Next, it protects our life total. This is pretty obvious. We don't take the damage right now, and we might not take damage down the line since this is Zada's Commando, and this can be a really annoying late game card. And of course, the point of all of this is to buy us time. This gives us time to find our mana that we need to cast the spells in our hand, which are supposed to be more powerful than our opponents, and eventually win the game. The next question is, what are the cards that our opponent could actually have here that matter? They could be bluffing, though that's incredibly unlikely. I'd say less than 5% of the time my opponent is either making a mistake or bluffing. So if that's the case, what are the cards that we need to worry about? Well, you know what? There's not as many as you might think. Let's take a look at them. In this case, there's 4: Sure Strike, Reality Hemorrhage, Brute Strength, and Outnumber. Now, that's not too many here, and we'll note that all of these represent a 1-for-1 trade, and none of them leave us completely blown out here, and basically all of them take our opponent's turn worth of mana in most scenarios, so we go ahead and make the block. In this scenario, our opponent ends up having a Reality Hemorrhage, and we're kind of punished by drawing an Outnumber the next turn. But still, we kept the threats off the board the best that we could. We ended up drawing a land here for Tadru Stalwart, which we play out. We don't block here as we're just effectively throwing away our creature for 3 mana. We do draw Devour in Flames here, which is pretty nice. Unfortunately, we can't return the Barons to the battlefield and use Outnumber to take down the Nettle Drone. So we're still up under the gun here for sure, as our opponent has a nice and powerful board and is looking to develop it. We finally stabilize here at this point, though, and as we draw a land and play our Eyeless Watcher, things are starting to turn around pretty significantly in our favor, even if we are taking damage from the Nettle Drone. Rolling Thunder looks really nice if we can ever find a second red mana, and Sparkmage's Gambit does put a bit of a dent in that, as it lines up some pretty nice attacks from our opponent here, which drop us down to 10 life, but we still have lots of spells on board and some really good stuff. We decided to go for the Kozilek's Channeler here to set up for the big Rolling Thunder down the line, as that gives us the best long-term outlook. We find an unknown source, which does give us access to a second red mana here and sets us up for a pretty sweet play with Rolling Thunder, where we get to kill 3 of our opponent's creatures in one fell swoop here. It does take a lot of our mana, and we have to tap a bunch of our creatures, but it ends up being pretty darn nice here. As you can see, we use our unknown source to make our second red mana source, and we even find a way to leave that Scion back just because it wasn't going to kill anything anyway. And we get a pretty raunchy 3-for-1 here, leaving us at 8 life and looking to be pretty stabilized with an outnumber and a dampening pulse still in our hand. Our opponent finds another Nettle Drone, but hey, that outnumber that we've had this whole game looks pretty good for keeping that thing at bay. And now that we've turned the corner, this is important. We start attacking. We're going to start kicking butt right now because we want to limit our opponent's draw steps. They're on 0 cards, and we want to make sure that we do the best we can to shut them out of the game. Opponent taps a bunch of mana here, realizes they can't actually awaken Boiling Earth, but does take out a few of our creatures with it, but we get nice and lucky here, rip a Birthing Hulk, and boom, we're off to the races. All of a sudden, we're attacking for massive amounts of lethal damage. Our opponent cannot keep up. They don't find what they need, and we win the match. Match 5, Game 1, starts off reasonably well, but without really the colors that we need to get things going. We find an unknown source to cast a Blinding Drone here, which unfortunately can't block the Stalking Drone, which gets us for 3 damage, and that's not the last damage that thing is going to do to us. It actually gets in for a ton of damage. Now we're down to 15 just off of the Stalking Drone, and it's falling quickly here. We go for an outnumber, but that gets countered as we take another 3, dropping down to 12, and feeling quite behind on mana here as our opponent plays a 5-drop Territorial Baloth as we fall to 9. We again try to keep it off our back here, but we take another 3 from it, going down to 6, and this Stalking Drone has done serious work for our opponent. We're still under the gun as far as mana goes, but with double Blinding Drone, we're starting to get more stable here. Opponent plays a Saddleback. We just had to tap down the Baloth. He's going to attack now, give flying. That lets us trade the Spider off for the Gravity Negator, which is a problem, and then eventually Containment Membrane, the big Baloth. But again, we still have this stupid Stalking Drone. I decide to go for a quadruple block and then make a really bad play here. When I forget that I need the extra power from the Scion, I use it to tap down a Saddleback that doesn't really need to be tapped down. My opponent, though, follows up with a massive Ruin Processor and forces a trade here. Unfortunately, at only 3 life with only 1 creature left, we have nothing to block, and we lose. Match 5, Game 2 is a really cool game here. We get off to a relatively slow start with what ends up being a Tajuru Stalwart on turn 3. This is just a 2-3, but it does a little bit of work here. It attacks into the Cloud Manta. Our opponent doesn't block it, and we get to develop our board with a Grove Rumbler. This looks pretty good for us as we got a land drop to hit, and bang, we draw a Thought-Knot Seer, play that, take away, in this case, sweep away, leaving Lagak and Shatter, and even play a Containment Membrane to lock down the flyer here. So things are looking really good for us early, but a Stalking Drone with a +1/+1 counter is awkward. We want to Devour in Flames here, but we can't because of the Void Shatter mana you see looming on our opponent's side of the board. So we decide just to play out a few other cards from our hand. Our opponent plays that Saddleback we knew about, but leaves up Void Shatter. We have a tough decision. Which one would we rather resolve? We decide ultimately to go with the Channeler as the bait. Our opponent takes it, and now we have Devour in Flames to set up attacks later. We draw a mountain, we play it, make our Grove Rumbler a 5/5, go for Devour in Flames here, and this is really cool. We get to attack with the Grove Rumbler because of our old friend Blighted Woodland. Even though our opponent has potentially a 5/6 Stalking Drone plus 2 other creatures, we have threat of activation of the Woodland for 2 landfall triggers, and we get to just keep it up. That party doesn't last very long, unfortunately, as Containment Membrane locks down the Rumbler, but we do find a nice 5/4 Trampling to Tajuru Pathwarden to replace it, and then the next turn we find a Birthing Hulk, and things start to settle in. We're not under any pressure, but we can't pressure our opponent, and our opponent's at 8 going to 13 after they find an 8/9 Ruin Processor. We find Fall of the Titans one of our best cards, but it's not going to be enough to kill our opponent here. So we decide to crack our Blighted Woodland just to get lands out of our deck and try to set something up. A Dampening Pulse sets it up further, but we need a way to get damage through. We have to find a way to win this game. We get a Scion Summoner, just helps clog up the board, but this board has gotten completely ridiculous, and bang, there it is. Rolling Thunder. So the combination of Rolling Thunder and Fall of the Titans is enough to kill our opponent, assuming that they don't gain any more life or have a counter spell. At this point, though, it feels like that is our line to victory here. So we're going to go ahead and fire off Rolling Thunder for not quite the full amount, but pretty close to it here. And we're going to just go upstairs for 8, dropping them down to 5 and trying to set up the win next turn with Fall of the Titans. Our opponent draws a scary one there and does have blue mana available, but we decide just to go for it anyway here. We find a Netcaster Spider. We're going to cast it and then surge out Fall of the Titans for 5 here. Boom. That's the game. All right, last game of the whole thing, trying to pull out the 4-1 here with this deck. And we start things off okay with the Netcaster Spider. Looks all right. And we make a big draw here with Exert Influence, and our opponent gives us something quite beautiful to exert our influence upon. A Seed Guardian. We steal it and attack in there for a couple of damage. Opponent tries to recover, but a full-on mind control is pretty tough in Limited. They don't print them very much, and we got to just straight up steal one of our opponent's best creatures. But opponent does a really good job here, Saddleback Lagak, of kind of shoring up the board here. We decide to get aggressive, tap down the best blocker, and rumble. We trade off our Spider for a creature, but get in for 3 damage. Opponent's going to immediately crack a Hedron Archive to draw cards, but we've set up Birthing Hulk for the next turn. We've also sideboarded in a Witness the End, I should note here. That is not in the main deck, but I switched around a little bit of mana and set it up because our opponent was playing such strong late game cards. I wanted to be able to sideboard a powerful card like Witness the End in. We, in fact, attack here with our Birthing Hulk and then fire off Witness the End. It's a little quick here, but what we end up getting is 2 really strong spells, a Containment Membrane as well as a Ruin Processor. So a big success there as we have our opponent down to 10, and we're kind of working the Seer's Lantern here. We find ourselves a Fall of the Titan to go with our Outnumber and our Containment Membrane. Keep applying pressure. We're going to outnumber the flying Gravity Negator here. And we end up deciding not to cast the Fall of the Titans and rather just to save it because we can actually do it for near lethal if we set it up. And plus we've got a really nice board state going and don't need to force the issue here. And again, I flirt with the idea of casting the Fall of the Titans, change my mind and end up just attacking, forcing a chump block here, playing a Grove Rumbler. And at that point with the Blinding Drone up, our opponent has seen enough and they concede the match. So hopefully we learned something from this deck. It worked out pretty good. I think the greed mode was probably correct to go for the big mana spells and even splash around a little bit with the mana that we ended up with. And the deck was pretty fun too. I got to say, having access to some of those really high-powered rares made our decision processes a lot more fun. 4-1, good record with the deck, and I'm quite happy with it. I'll take that. If you would have told me this deck would go 4-1 at the onset, I probably would have said, I'll take it. So, good enough. Hopefully you learned something from it. Look forward to more of these videos from Limited Resources. And of course, as always, you can find me on Twitter, Marshall_LR, and you can support the show directly, which is, by the way, how these videos have came to be on the Patreon, patreon.com/limitedresources. We'll see you on the next one.